wasn't guilt I felt when I watched him shake my hand at the altar. It was something closer to fear, the kind that sits quiet in your chest and doesn't make a sound. My daughter's name is Sophie. She's 31, smart enough to finish her accounting degree in 3 years, stubborn enough to argue with me about the thermostat until midnight. When she brought Ethan home the first time, I thought, okay, he's polished, confident, laughs at the right moments. Her mother, God rest her, would have seen through him in about 40 seconds. I needed longer. Ethan grew up in Scottsdale. His father sold insurance. He'd done a few years in commercial real estate in Phoenix, fixed some condos during the recovery years, made decent money from what I could tell. When he proposed to Sophie at a restaurant in downtown Nashville, our city, where I've lived for 38 years, she called me from the parking lot, crying the good kind of tears. I told her I was happy for her, and I meant it. Mostly. I own a landscaping company, built it from nothing in 1989 with a used pickup truck and a lawnmower I bought from a neighbor's estate sale for $60. 35 years later, I have a fleet of 12 trucks, 4 crews, contracts with 3 commercial parks and 2 hospital campuses. I'm not a wealthy man by Nashville's new standards, the kind that's moved in since the music industry money started bleeding into everything. But I own my property outright. That includes the house, a rental duplex on Nolensville Pike, about 18 acres out in Williamson County, that I've held for 20 years, and a retirement account that took me 3 decades to build. Sophie knew about all of it. She'd grown up watching me do the books at the kitchen table on Sunday nights. Ethan, I came to realize, had done his own kind of studying. The wedding was set for a Saturday in October. We'd rented a venue out in Franklin, a restored barn on an old farm strung with lights, exactly what Sophie wanted. Her best friend Margot was maid of honor. Ethan's brother Nathan was best man. There were about 120 guests, mostly family and people I'd known for decades. The ceremony started at 4 in the afternoon. I remember the light coming through the wooden slats on the west wall, long and amber, the way October light does when the sky is completely clear. Sophie wore a dress her mother had picked out the pattern for years before she got sick. She'd kept the sketch in a box. She'd found a seamstress who could make it real. When I walked her down the aisle, she held my arm the way she used to hold it crossing parking lots when she was 4 years old. Tight, not from nerves, something else. The ceremony itself was maybe 25 minutes. The officiant, a pastor from the church Sophie had gone to in college, kept it simple. When it came time for me to give her away, I said what you're supposed to say, but I looked at Ethan's face when I said it. He was smiling, and for just a second, it didn't reach his eyes. Afterward, before the reception began, there was a cocktail hour on the lawn. String quartet. Little plates of food I'd spent 3 weeks negotiating with the caterer over. I stood near the edge of the tent, talking to my old friend Russell, who'd worked with me since the early 90s, when Sophie appeared at my elbow. She looked the way a bride is supposed to look. Hair perfect. Cheeks flushed. But she leaned up close to my ear, and she said, "Dad, I need to give you something." She pressed a folded piece of paper into the breast pocket of my jacket. Not a card, just a piece of paper, folded twice. Then she pulled back, smiled at Russell, said something about going to find Ethan, and walked away. I didn't open it then. Something in the way she handed it, practiced, almost, like she'd thought it through, told me to wait. Russell was telling me something about his sister's knee surgery. I nodded. I put my hand against my chest pocket just to make sure the paper was still there. I waited until I stepped inside and used the restroom. Stood under the fluorescent light, opened it. She'd written in pencil, small and careful. "Dad, before the night's over, don't let Ethan get you alone. Don't sign anything. Don't shake on anything. We'll talk Monday. I love you. I'm okay. Just trust me." I stood there for a moment staring at the paper. My first thought was that I'd misread it. I read it again. I hadn't. My second thought was, what does she know that I don't? I folded it back up, put it in my inside jacket pocket, and walked back out to the reception. The rest of the evening I smiled at everyone and said the right things and cut the cake and danced with my daughter while the band played something slow and country, and I kept one eye on Ethan the entire night. He was working the room. That's the only way to describe it. I'd noticed it before at family dinners, the way he moved from conversation to conversation like he was looking for something, or positioning something. I'd told myself I was just being a protective father. Old habits. But watching him that night, I started paying attention differently. Around 9 o'clock, he found me near the bar. "Hey, Bernard," he said. He was the only person on earth who'd never called me Bernie. Always Bernard. Like we were in a meeting. "You got a minute? I've been thinking about something I'd love to run by you." There it was. I looked at him. His smile was easy. His jacket was still crisp. He'd had maybe 2 drinks all night. I'd been watching. "Tonight?" I said. "Just quick," he said. "It's actually good news, something I've been working on for the family." For the family. He said it like we were already partners. I told him I had to check in with the caterer about the late-night snacks we'd ordered, that we'd catch up before the night was done. He nodded, still smiling. Went back to working the room. I found Russell. I told him to not let me get cornered alone all night. He gave me a look that said he had questions, but Russell's been my friend for 30 years. He just nodded and stayed close. Monday came. Sophie drove over in the morning, still in the flush of honeymooning from their first night at the hotel downtown. She sat at my kitchen table with both hands around a coffee mug, and she told me everything. About 6 months before the wedding, she'd found a document on Ethan's laptop while she was printing a boarding pass. She hadn't been snooping, she was just using the shared printer, and the file had been open on the desktop. A spreadsheet. Her name wasn't on it, but mine was. My company name, the property on Nolansville Pike, the acreage in Williamson County. There were rows and rows of columns, estimated value, lien status, current ownership structure, notes in a separate column, probate complications if no will updated, LLC transfer possible, gift tax exclusion, annual, power of attorney, explore. She'd taken a photo of the screen on her phone before she closed the laptop. She'd spent 4 months trying to convince herself it was something innocent. Maybe he was thinking about our estate planning in a good faith way. Maybe he was going to suggest something helpful. She was marrying him. She loved him. She wanted to find the explanation that didn't break everything. But 3 weeks before the wedding, she'd overheard a phone call. She'd come home early from a work event, walked in through the back, and heard him in the study, talking to someone. Not fighting, not whispering, just talking calmly, the way he always talked, saying the old man doesn't have a real estate attorney. Just uses whoever the company uses. It's not going to be complicated. She'd stood in the hallway holding her keys. She hadn't confronted him. She'd decided to get married because she needed more time to understand what she was dealing with. But she'd written me that note. "I didn't want to blow up your night," she told me. "Or mine. I just needed you to not do anything irreversible before we could talk." I looked at my daughter across my kitchen table. 31 years old. Her mother's eyes. Her mother's way of carrying weight quietly until she'd figured out what to do with it. I asked her if she still had the photo. She did. I called my attorney that afternoon. Not the one I use for the landscaping business, my personal attorney, a woman named Cecile who I've worked with for 12 years and who I trust completely. I sent her the photo Sophie had taken, and I told her what I'd observed at the wedding. Cecile called me back 2 hours later and said, "Bernard, I want you to not do anything. Don't talk to him, don't discuss finances, don't accept any document or verbal agreement until we've had time to look at your estate documents." We met in her office on Wednesday. What she found wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a crime scene. It was more like a blueprint. My existing will had been drawn up 12 years ago, before Sophie and I had drifted apart for a few years and then come back together. It was outdated in several ways. More importantly, I had no durable power of attorney in place, which meant that if anything happened to me, a court would have to appoint someone to manage my affairs. Ethan, as my son-in-law, would be a natural candidate to petition for that role. My business LLC had not been formally separated from my personal real estate holdings in the way Cecile recommended. It was not illegal, but it created a situation where someone with access to certain documents, someone, say, who had studied the structure of my assets carefully, could potentially move assets or encumber property during an incapacity. It's not that anything wrong has happened, Cecile said carefully, but someone has done significant research on your financial structure, and based on what you've told me, that someone is your new son-in-law. I asked her what she needed from me to fix it. I spent the next 6 weeks working with Cecile and a CPA she recommended. We updated my will. We established a revocable living trust. My assets, including the Williamson County land, were transferred into the trust, which I controlled as trustee and which named Sophie as successor trustee, not Ethan. We established a durable power of attorney naming Cecile herself as my agent in the event of incapacity. We restructured the LLC so that the business assets were clearly separated from my personal real estate. It wasn't glamorous work. It was a lot of paperwork and a lot of afternoons sitting across from attorneys and CPAs going over documents. But when it was done, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Solid. Like the ground under me was actually there. Sophie, meanwhile, was doing her own accounting. She and Ethan had been married about 8 weeks when she found the second thing. This one she'd actually been looking for, carefully, deliberately, the way her accounting brain worked. She was going through their joint bank account records, tracing deposits and withdrawals, when she found a payment. $340 to a company called Meridian Research Partners. She looked them up. Their website was spare, professional, vague. They described themselves as providing asset research and due diligence services for estate planning and wealth management. She called the number, got voicemail, left her name and number, never got a call back. She dug further. She found 2 more payments to the same company over the preceding 8 months. The first had been made 4 months before he'd even proposed to her. She brought it to me on a Saturday afternoon, sitting at the same kitchen table, the same coffee mug. "Dad," she said, "he paid someone to research you, before he even asked me to marry him." I sat with that for a moment. I thought about the handshake at my door the first time she'd brought him over, the easy confidence, the way he'd asked early on about the landscaping business. That must be a lot to manage. You ever think about bringing in a partner? I'd thought he was making conversation. I thought about the way he'd said for the family at the wedding bar. I thought about my daughter standing in a hallway holding her keys. "What do you want to do?" I asked her. She didn't hesitate. "I want out. I've wanted out since the hallway. I just needed to be sure." The divorce process was not quick and it was not easy, but it was clean in the ways that mattered. Because they had been married less than a year, because they had no children, and because Sophie had structured their joint finances carefully from the beginning, keeping her own accounts separate and making sure nothing of mine had ever been commingled with anything of theirs, the legal exposure was limited. Ethan's attorney made some early noise about Sophie's future inheritance being considered a marital asset in the settlement negotiation. Cecile connected Sophie with a family law attorney in David, who was direct about what that argument was worth. Not much, given the timeline and the documentation Sophie had assembled. The noise died down. What did not die down was what happened with the research firm. David, as part of the discovery process, subpoenaed the financial records related to Meridian Research Partners. What came back was more detailed than any of us expected. The reports Ethan had paid for included property records, county assessor valuations, my business registration documents, my LLC filing history, a summary of my known real estate holdings, and, most troubling, what appeared to be a report on the estimated probate complications of my estate as currently structured. In other words, someone had looked at my life from the outside and written a document explaining how to get access to it. David shared the documents with Cecile. Cecile was quiet for a moment when she reviewed them, and then she said the thing I'd been thinking but hadn't let myself say out loud. "Bernard, This was not a young man falling in love with your daughter. I'd known that, somewhere under everything, since the wedding. Since the paper in my pocket. Maybe before. The divorce was finalized 9 months after the wedding. Ethan moved back to Scottsdale. Sophie moved into the rental unit on Nolensville Pike, her idea, not mine. She said she wanted to start over on her own terms. She started paying me rent, which I didn't need, but I accepted it because I understood what she was actually paying for. The last thing that happened I didn't find out about until several months after the divorce. One of Ethan's former colleagues, a woman he'd worked with at the commercial real estate firm in Phoenix, had seen Sophie's LinkedIn profile update to show she was divorced. She reached out. She told Sophie that Ethan had done something similar before, in Phoenix, with a woman whose father owned a small manufacturing company. That relationship had ended before marriage, but not before he'd spent 2 years gathering information on the father's business structure. Nothing criminal had ever been proven. Nothing had ever been filed. Sophie told me this on the phone. I was sitting on my front porch watching the sun go down over the neighbor's oak tree. The leaves were coming back. It was March by then, early spring. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was thinking about my wife, who had known the right things from people's faces without having to be told. I was thinking about the $60 lawnmower and the 35 years. I was thinking about the way Sophie had pressed that piece of paper into my pocket so carefully, so quietly, in the middle of her own wedding. "Are you okay?" I asked her. "I'm getting there," she said. "You know what your mother would say. That I have good instincts and I should have trusted them sooner." "That's part of it," I said. "The other part is, she'd say the apple doesn't fall far." Sophie laughed. Not the full laugh, the smaller one that means she's actually moved. We stayed on the phone a while after that, not really talking about anything. The oak tree's shadow moved across the yard. A couple of my neighbor's kids were riding bikes in the cul-de-sac. I think about what could have happened if she hadn't written that note. If I'd been alone with Ethan that night at the bar and he'd slid something across to me, a document, a handshake deal, a power of attorney disguised as a gift, and I'd been disarmed enough by the occasion to agree to something before I'd thought it through. I was 63 years old on that wedding day. I wasn't naive, but I was happy. And happy makes you less careful. She protected me at her own wedding, in the middle of her own ceremony, in the middle of a day that was supposed to be entirely hers. She thought about me. That's who she is. The landscaping company is still running. I've been working with my operations manager, a good man I've trusted for 15 years, on a formal succession plan because Cecile was right that I'd been too informal about it for too long. The Williamson County land is in the trust. The duplex is in the trust. Everything is documented, protected, clear. Sophie's doing well. She's been with a new firm in Nashville for 6 months, doing what she's good at. She came over for dinner 2 Sundays ago and we argued about the thermostat, which meant things were back to normal. I'm not a man who says much about what I feel. 38 years in landscaping. You learn to be quiet and work and let the work speak. But I'll say this. I built everything I have with my hands, and I almost lost it to someone who never dirtied his. The person who stopped that from happening was my daughter, on the day she was supposed to only be thinking about herself. I don't know what Ethan thought he was going to find when he looked at my life on paper. Assets, valuations, structures to exploit, numbers in columns. He didn't find what he was looking for, because what I actually have isn't in any of those documents. It's sitting across from me at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, arguing about the coffee being too strong. I keep coming back to the image of that folded piece of paper. Something written in pencil, small and careful, pressed into my jacket pocket during a cocktail hour while a string quartet played 30 feet away. That's what stopped everything. Not a lawyer, not a private investigator, not some dramatic confrontation, a piece of paper and a daughter who thought clearly when she had every reason not to. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what it actually takes to do what Sophie did. Because it wasn't easy. She was in the middle of her own wedding. She was wearing her mother's dress. She was supposed to be the happiest she'd ever been, And instead of just letting the evening carry her forward, which nobody would have blamed her for, she made a choice, a quiet, deliberate, costly choice to protect someone else before herself. That's not instinct. That's character. You don't develop that kind of moral clarity on a single day. It builds slowly, over years of watching adults around you make decisions, over years of learning that doing the right thing isn't always the same as doing the comfortable thing. Sophie had that in her. I like to think some of it came from watching her mother, some of it maybe from watching me work and not cut corners when it would have been easy to. Character gets built in ordinary moments before it ever gets tested in hard ones. And then there's what she did after. She didn't panic. She didn't immediately blow up her marriage on suspicion. She sat with the uncertainty for months, gathered evidence the way her accounting brain knew how to gather evidence, and only moved when she was sure. That kind of disciplined thinking, staying rational when everything in you wants to react, that's something most people never learn. A lot of us either act too fast on emotion or wait too long out of fear. Sophie found the middle. She thought it through, and then she acted. I have to be honest about my own part in all this. I almost wasn't ready to be protected. I was happy that night. I was proud. And a happy, proud man at his daughter's wedding is exactly the kind of man someone like Ethan would approach at a bar, with an easy smile and a document. I had never properly structured my estate. I'd been informal about things I should have been formal about for years. Cecile told me as much, gently, professionally, and she was right. There's a kind of stubbornness that comes from building something yourself. You think because you built it you understand it completely. You don't always see what it looks like from the outside, to someone who's looking for a way in. What I learned is that building something takes one kind of strength, and protecting it takes another. The first kind is physical. Early mornings, long seasons, hard decisions about payroll and equipment and contracts. The second kind is harder to name. It's the willingness to sit across from an attorney and say, I don't know if this is structured correctly. Can you help me fix it? It's the willingness to hear an uncomfortable truth about someone your daughter loves without letting emotion make the decision for you. It's endurance. Not the loud kind, but the steady kind that keeps you upright when you'd rather just look away. Ethan saw columns and rows when he looked at my life. Valuations, lien statuses, probate vulnerabilities. What he didn't see, and what no spreadsheet could have shown him, is that the most valuable thing I have can't be transferred by any document or encumbered by any lien. It moves on its own. It thinks on its own. It pressed a piece of paper into my pocket on the hardest day of its life, because it decided I was worth protecting. That's not an asset. That's my daughter, and she was never his to count.